tonight in the focus group stakeholder meetings for the Fitzgerald area. I'm Tom Burdett. I'm the Community Development Director for Bothell, and I want to introduce some of the team members that we have here tonight as we get acquainted with you. On the city team, Bruce Blackburn, who many of you know, our senior planner, Chris Sorensen, who is a planner that's working in our planning department, recently hired, Bothell native. Out in the front lobby is Julie Ewick and Leslie Ryan Zink, who have been helping to organize and get people checked in. So we appreciate their help. For the consulting team, let me start with the parametrics team and Darren Sandino, and that's Darren. Ben Burke, who's also with parametrics, and Paul Fent. So you're going to hear more from them tonight on different aspects of their site investigation and data collection for the sub-area. Last but not least, Kirsten Green with Kogan Owens and Green, and Nadine Appenbrink with Ferganassi and Associates. They're a highly recognized urban design firm, and Kirsten is going to be our chief facilitator tonight for this project. We have 3 workshops planned. Tonight's the first one. We have 2 more. The next 2 will be on May 26th and June 9th. We hope that we can bring in consistent representation in all of those. I know that, things may change, but hopefully one or more members of your families can attend those sessions. Tonight is kind of an overview of some of the information that's collected today and some of the research into best available science and low impact development. Oftentimes when I check in or hand someone my credit card, they look at it and they kind of look at it quickly and they go, "Oh, Tom Burdett, you're the Motel 6 guy. So if you want to call me the Motel 6 guy, that's great. I'm happy." I've come to respond to that nomenclature. But tonight, they say that leadership has 3 components to it. And those components are vision, alignment and ownership, and execution. And tonight, we're hoping to begin the vision process. When I was first starting out in this business a long time ago, I didn't have any money. I just gotten out of grad school, and I'd taken on my first job in Colorado Springs. And as part of that, I like to ski, and I like Colorado, and I said, well, no money, like to ski, I'll volunteer. So I volunteered to teach skiing for the Colorado School of Deaf and Blind. And it was a very unique experience. But it certainly taught me a new meaning of leadership, a more literal meaning. Because as we would drive up to the ski area with the students, with the kids in the bus, they would joke around. They were having a great time. They liked being away from the campus. One of the kids will say, "Hey, you're gonna," they could tell blind jokes. One of the kids would say, "Hey, you're gonna hit a rock." Another one say, "You're gonna hit a tree," and one of them said, "You're gonna hit a moose." They'd top each other with these jokes. But from my perspective, those kids had just a great perspective on life. And what we were taught is to learn to work with them, get to know them, learn how they've compensated. We also addressed, we also figured out how to get them to know our voices. And we spent a day with kids that were visually impaired but could still ski, and they loved it. Part of that teaching process, if there are any educators in the audience, part of that process is that for us to become teachers, we had to have blindfolds put around us and ski without sight. And I can tell you, I was much more afraid of doing that than the children were, of going out with me. But what the children learned is they taught me in this process, is that leadership is a component of collaboration and a component of trust. And what collaboration does for us is bring the collective good together, which is what we're hoping to do tonight. Bring the collective good together to work out land use issues of the Fitzgerald area, and develop some trust in our neighbors that we'll come together and work as one. So with that, I'll turn the time over to Kirsten. I'll tell you that as the consulting team and me, we have no perceived outcomes of where we might end up. It's really up to you. You're the leaders. We're the blind kids. So please help us know more about the area that you live in and where you would like to go. So thank you. Kirsten.
Thanks, Al. Great. So again, my name is Kirsten Green. Really pleased to be here with you and working for you in this collaborative process. As Tom mentioned, it's a little bit different. So you might notice this is not a public hearing format. This is generative and collaborative, and we hope together we'll do some shared learning about the environmental conditions as well as the opportunities and our shared interests. So we've specifically made a point of, thank you for accommodating us, of mixing folks up around the room, so you might not be with even your family who you came in with, so thank you for your patience with that. It'll be particularly important actually at workshop number 2, where we'll be doing some hands-on work about what kind of tools and techniques might work best in this area. So tonight is actually the most talking to you evening that we'll have as the team from Parametrics presents what they have been doing to date and updating. You'll hear from Darren Sandino first. I've had about 20 years of career in facilitating very contentious discussions about people who care about things deeply. And so I have a lot of respect for each one of you and really appreciate you giving up your evening to come be here with us. It is a great privilege, and we have high hopes and are confident that together we can come out with some solutions that provide additional certainty for everyone. So what's important tonight, and in the 3 meetings, all 3, is that we listen to each other and accord each other the same level of respect that we'd like to be accorded. So be sure to hear each other out, and this will be particularly important at the next workshop where we're doing facilitated table discussions and hands-on work with the maps. So trying to understand the perspectives of your table mates will be really important so that we can come to a shared solution. I would ask you to silence your cell phones if you don't mind, or put them on vibrate. You can certainly come and go. The restrooms are around to your right, and there's water and cookies in the lobby. So thanks to the City of Bothell for providing all that. So again, we hope to learn some things together. We've been working through the presentation. You'll hear about the timeline of the draft report coming out next week, and the reason why we haven't snowed you with information yet is part of that draft report is to hear from you and what might fit in the Fitzgerald sub-area. Are there any questions about the process itself? Just real quick, any clarifications? Other than that, if it's clear, that's great. Please, ma'am.
I just had a question, Suzanne Brunel.
Yes.
The Parametrics report is ongoing. Do you want us to have any questions? If you have any questions to do in real time, or do you want us to wait? Or how would you want us to share our questions?
Okay, well, tonight, thank you. So let's go over the agenda tonight. And if someone has one handy, is it right here? Okay, here's one too as well. Thank you. Okay. So, so thanks. So tonight's agenda, many of you might have it at the table, but we'll do a little bit of polling just to warm up. You have these funny keypads. How many in the room have used keypad polling before? Thank you. Okay, so now somebody, it's kind of fun. So it's an instant response technology. And you should be able to, we'll be able to hear, sort of get a feel for who's all in the room. We'll hear an update on the best available science and low impact development techniques from the parametrics team that Tom introduced. Then we'll be, okay, so on that, that's when we will open up for some questions for clarification. So again, this topic could be a PhD dissertation. So we know that we won't be able to answer or get to all the questions tonight, but if you have follow-up questions, we respect your time. So we'll start and end all the meetings on time. So we'll formally conclude at 7:30, but if you have additional questions, I think the parametrics team can stay for another half hour and probably answer any questions there. And then certainly please be in touch with the project manager, Bruce Blackburn, and his contact information, I think, is on every single piece of paper you have. So thanks, Bruce. You've been here quite a while and has a lot of the history. So does that get to your question about tonight, or were you?
Actually, my question
Yeah.
was more, I didn't want to interrupt the presentation if there was a final
Right.
question at the end.
That's right.
Do you want us to interrupt it?
No, thank you for waiting till the end of the presentation. Yeah, because something may, be presented that you would have had your question on. So thank you. Great. All right. So if there are no other questions on the format, please, sir.
Yeah, in terms of the longer-term outcome here, is there a deliverable we're looking to put out for the city council so they have something to work with?
That's exactly right. And we will see that in the next steps on the presentation, but that's right. So we don't, as Tom said, we don't have any preconceived notions I have to read it because I can't say the acronym, if the North Creek Fish and Wildlife Critical Habitat Area stays intact or not, or what kind of tools will be forthcoming from this generative process. So but it will be a package advance to City Council for comprehensive plan and code updates. That's what we expect. So that property owners, we hold that property owners are also environmentalists, but if there's environmental concerns, so that everyone knows and is able to participate in that public hearing process as it goes to council. But that is the intent.
Recommendation that
That's
is
right.
delivered out of this process.
That's right. Yep, thank you. So it'll be probably a suite of tools. So not one solution, one size won't fit all the properties here, but that makes sense. Thanks. Good. All right, well, Nadine, with that, then perhaps we'll just get to filling out these keypads and see how they work. So does everyone have one? Please,
Does
Nadine.
everyone have one? Yeah, I can
Run
All right,
them
looks
around?
like everyone does. Great. All right, so we'll be having a few questions now, and then just 2 questions at the very end after the parametrics team and after the Q&A. So
I just hope, are
Oh,
you
a
able
little
to
bit.
hear Nadine okay?
a little bit higher. I do have a soft voice, so I'll
Thank you.
try and enunciate.
Yeah, thank you.
Polling, if you guys have used it, it's an effective tool to advance shared discussions, and we may use it in the next meetings as well. So tonight, go with your gut. There are no wrong answers, and your responses are anonymous. So with that, we're here talking about the Fitzgerald sub-area. And so the area boundaries are from 228th Street in the north to 45th to 240th in the south, and then to 405 on the edge. So first question, how are you connected to the study area? A, so if it's A, you'll press it's either number 1 or letter A on the thing. Property owner in the study area. B, a concern over the environment in the area. C, both A and B. And D, other. And so in the top, you can see, I don't know if you can all read it, but I can see how many people have responded. So we know about how many people are in the room, and also I know when to advance. So I'll give everyone a few more minutes or a few more seconds. They should already be on, and we've tested them, the batteries. It should light up green. There's a little button. And so if you hit another thing, if you hit the wrong button, you can hit the right button again. So it'll only record one answer, and it's the last thing that you hit. So you can change your mind as long as I don't advance it. So we've got 31 responses. I'm going to go ahead and advance it. So then we can see, all right. So we have 41% property owners, 16 concern on the environment, 31 A and B, and 13 other. So we'll go to the next question. How long have you lived in the study area? And I did the math for you guys, so you can have a little cheat. A, up to 5 years. B, over 5 years, so at least from 2013 on. C, over 10 years. D, over 15. E, over 30. F, over 45. And G, I'm not a resident of the Fitzgerald subarea. All right, wait on one more person. There we go. So we'll move ahead since we have 31. All right, so we have quite a few long-term residents and quite a few people who aren't residents of the area. So this is a question sort of regarding the process as a whole, so all 3 meetings. What we want to understand the desired outcomes of this group. So what's most important to you? And this slide, since we have some longer answers, they didn't all fit on the polling slide. So we're going to go through them and then we'll advance to the actual polling question. So A, to craft local regulations and standards that are informed by best available science and best management practices of low impact development to satisfy the requirements of the Growth Management Act. B, to protect environmental resources for current and future generations. C, the ability to utilize property in the study area for development. D, a civil and constructive set of meetings that result in certainty for all participants going forward. E, all of the above. And F, something else not listed on here. So now we'll go to the next slide, and this is where you can answer the question. So A, craft regulations that are informed by best practices. B, protect environment for current and future generations. C, the ability to utilize property for development. D, a civil and constructive set of meetings. E, all of the above. And F, something else that wasn't listed. I'll give you a few more seconds. A few more stragglers.
This is the meatiest question.
Yeah.
Take your time.
So all right, we'll go ahead and move forward. All right, looks like C and E are strong contenders.
Did you have any other on that?
I don't think we did.
Okay, great, thanks.
No. So, all right. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Darren, and he and the parametrics team will go through their presentation.
If I could just interject once as Darren's coming up and getting his PowerPoint up there. The handouts, we alluded to these, but the agenda is probably the least critical, but you're welcome to take that.
Yeah.
The comment form we made, it mirrors the questions, so you don't need to fill that out, but importantly on the back, it does have room for just any questions or comments that you would like to give us in addition, and please just drop those off tonight. We will read them in their entirety. This handout, just the 3 meeting outline, and then the Bruce version of the history of the Fitzgerald sub-area. These will all be available on the Community Development Department website, as well as the PowerPoint and the polling results early next week. So if you have anything that you don't think is represented accurately, please let us know, and we'll look to modify. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Darren Sandino, and I'm the project manager with Parametrics that's assisting the city here in the technical piece of this, but specifically related to best available science and low impact development. So this is going to be probably the most technical piece of the presentation this evening. So like you said, with questions, we'll be available towards the end of this, and we'd be glad to assist with any questions you may have. So just as a big picture, this slide here, as you notice, in the red provides the Coal Creek watershed, and then the dashed line, which is a little fainter around, shows the context of the Fitzgerald sub-area within the greater context being the Coal Creek watershed. So this just provides an illustration, big picture view of where our study area sits in the geography of the area. So those of you that haven't been part of the process up to this point, we thought it would be helpful just to recap what we've been up to, what we're doing right now, and then where we'll be going. We had a gentleman over here who had a question that ultimately I think was answered, and what our ultimate goal is here and what we'll be delivering to council as a package as part of this public engagement process and the work that we're doing. So initially, it was a larger data gathering exercise of looking at best available science and low impact development. Some of these things have moved and technology have moved in recent years over time. So it's taking a look at those things, not necessarily on a site perspective, but more just in general. And during that time, we also were able to work with the city and Bruce and his staff to gather the most current GIS data. The city has a great GIS database, and so we were able to, many of the maps you'll see here today are part of that culmination of that captures a lot of the features, the natural features and systems that one would see on the ground. So both of those pieces are complete, and then we look into field reconnaissance exercise. Many of you were kind enough to open the door to have us take a look around, and we appreciate that. It really provides an opportunity. You can look at all the GIS you want in the world, but to be able to go and look at some of these properties and see some of these things and put your hands on them is important. So we appreciate everybody's willingness to let us do that. So now brings us up to current times. We're going to have a series of 3 public involvement meetings. Each one of these will help inform and guide some of the work that we're doing. So we do appreciate you all being here. Like I said, this data will be gathered and analyzed to help inform what kind of solutions we can come up along with the research and what the conditions are on the ground. So, like I said, the polling will be collecting a lot of feedback from you all this meeting and then through the next 2 exercises, which will be more hands-on. And then at that point in time, we'll be working in the next week or 2 on the 20th coming up here soon. We'll have our first draft deliverable technical memorandum that will be published that you all can take a look at with an understanding that is draft and will be subject to further input during those meetings and refinement of our research. So. And then, like I said, at the end of it, the ultimate goal will be to use, this information will be used for a future plan and code update that would be presented to council. So with that, I will pass this on to Ben Burke, who is our best available science lead.
So hi, everybody. It's good to see some faces we met on the field visit. My name is Ben Burke. I'm a senior scientist with a background in fisheries biology, and I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of jurisdictions in Western Washington on their critical area code updates in various phases. So I'm pretty familiar with the process. And mainly here, I don't want to, like you said, go into a PhD dissertation, but I want to talk a little bit about kind of why we're doing this. I mean, why has the city elected to break out this as a sub area and have a different level of regulations? And, basically the premise is to protect endangered species habitat, endangered fish in North Creek. So North Creek is an important local watershed. These aren't necessarily my values. These are values that have been put in various documents that the city has put out. It is a very productive stream system. North Creek, Swamp Creek, and Bear Creek are sort of the 3 big stream systems that contribute to the Sammamish River. And one of the more important things pretty much for this particular one is that fish and fish habitat in North Creek are very dependent on cold water, and particularly during the summer. It's a pretty unique watershed basin in that, the majority of the upper watershed is really highly developed in Snohomish County and the city of Everett. And so as you move further into Bothell, and this is relatively unique, you actually get better and higher quality habitat as you move down the system. A lot of times you have the real nice habitat in the upper watershed and then the urban areas in the bottom. So it's a little bit of a unique circumstance. And I believe that's why originally this was crafted as having a sub area that had some different protections to protect the values that are unique to this particular basin. Why don't you go ahead and click it on, oh, the next one, just hit advance. There you go. So this here is a map of critical areas in the study area. This is just the city GIS, and I just wanted to point out a couple points on this one. And again, I'll be here after the meeting if you want to talk specifics. This is too much to go into, but kind of the main the features of this that make this a little bit unique is the Coal Creek watershed is a groundwater fed system. So a lot of the rivers and streams in Western Washington are driven by surface water flows. So the habitat features and water quality and the mixture of pools and riffles and various other things are driven by surface water flows. And this particular one, because of the fact that it's driven by groundwater, you have some relatively unique features. You also have some pretty interesting things that have gone on in the past. This is a very highly modified system. I mean, with the exception of some of the piped stream systems in the city of Seattle, there's been a lot of modification. There's fish ladders throughout the system. The stream goes under buildings in places. We've seen, there's some landscape ponds on several of the tributaries and fish barriers. There's a lot of culverts that are very small and undersized. So although it is a groundwater fed system and is very unique, it is not really a particularly pristine system. But the main benefit it does provide is it provides a steady source of cool, cold water, particularly during the summer, to North Creek. A lot of the upper watershed is in Snohomish County, again, pretty well developed, and in the portions that it's in, Bothell is generally less disturbed. And so again, it's a little bit of a unique situation. In addition to the creek themselves, there's a lot of relatively large and high density wetlands in the area. You can see on this map. We unfortunately didn't pull the whole city back, but if you pull it back, the area along North Creek, and particularly in Fitzgerald and then upstream a little bit, have a lot higher quality and larger wetlands than pretty much any of the other portions of the city. And so that's just sort of some of the background information. I mean, you that live here obviously know all those things, but hopefully we've taken some time, done the research, and have gone out in the field and taken a look at those things. And like I said, if there's any particular information or points that you want to share with me, data sources, historic information, I'd be happy to stick around afterwards and listen to it. That's what I'm here for today.
I might just add too, that anything, if you would like to add anything on the back of your comment form, that all will become part of the record. So feel free to fill that out and drop it off if you'd like something to be known to boundaries.
Do you want to talk about the field reconnaissance and the pictures? Well, hi, I'm Paul Fent. I'm also with Parametrics. I'm a water resources engineer. And we did take actually I took 2 different trips out there, and it's really important, as Ben mentioned, we can stand out there, we can look at maps all day, but you don't get quite the proper feel or the proper scale of what the systems are and what the neighborhoods are like, and how an area of trees or an area of grass looks different when you're standing in the middle of it rather than if you're looking at a map or looking at somebody else's pictures. So it's important I think it's important for us to convey to you that we have been out there, we've walked around. This was certainly not a scientific type analysis, but it was certainly a reconnaissance type analysis to give us a feel for what we were going to be looking at, what we're looking at. So I'm going to talk about the hydrology and the water resources and the stormwater parts about the project. So it's really important, and if some of you maybe have seen a little bit of this before, but it's really important to kind of set the stage a bit for what certain things that I'm going to talk about. And the first thing is we're going to talk a lot about forests and impervious areas. So the first thing is, what's a forest? And is it a tree or is it some sort of other thing? So when we're talking about a forest in the context of this plan, we're talking about a plant community that will have a relatively intact canopy, which means the big trees on top, mid-story, which is generally the shrubs and so on in the middle, and then an understory, which is the small plants that are on the ground. And a forest, and a functioning forest, also includes soils, the soils that are with it. So it could just still be a tree and plants, but if the original soils are gone, or if there's not good soil development, it's really not a forest in the context that we're talking about. And the context we're talking about is about hydrology. And what hydrology is it's a science of water, so that when water falls out of the sky as rain and hits the ground, what happens to the water? Does it go into the ground? Does it run off from the ground? Does it evaporate back in the sky? That's hydrology. So when we're talking about forest, we're interested in how does this performance, this forest work relative to rainfall and relative to hydrology, how much water runs off from it. The other important definition we want to talk about is imperviousness. And imperviousness means it's a surface that's on the ground through which rain doesn't go. It's a solid surface, rain can't soak through it, it runs off of it. But not all impervious areas are alike from the perspective of stormwater management and from the perspective of hydrology. And there's an important distinction that we make between what's called effective impervious area and total impervious area. So total impervious area is basically all the impervious area you see. It's a rooftop, it's a driveway, it's a sidewalk, it's the street. Those are impervious areas. But from a hydrology perspective, what matters is what we call effective impervious area. And the difference is that total impervious area, like it says, all impervious area in the basin. Effective is the surfaces under which rain falls, but the water doesn't necessarily get right to a stream. It might fall on the ground, like the trail here, run off to the grass on the sides, and then infiltrate there. So that's not effective impervious area. There's a poor little way or a poor pathway for the water falling on that trail to get to the stream. It tends to go there. So there's a difference between total and effective impervious surfaces. So you've heard a lot about low impact development or low impact design, or LID. So what is it and what is it intended to do? So this is a quote from the permit that the city of Bothell has gotten from the Department of Ecology. It's the same permit that everyone else that's what's called a phase 1 or a phase 2 community has. And this is the same definition. So this applies to everywhere in the state, certainly in Western Washington. So what is LID? It's a stormwater strategy. And we want to emphasize it mimics pre-disturbance, which means that what the land is like before people came here, before it was developed. And it mimics pre-disturbance hydrologic processes of infiltration, filtration, storage, evaporation, and transpiration. So what are those things? I talk about hydrology as being the science of the water. The infiltration is water that goes into the ground. Filtration is water that's going through vegetation, and if there are pollutants in it, they're removed. Storage is if there's a little bowl or a wetland or something like that, that's water that's storage that's sitting, that doesn't run to the stream or runs there very slowly. Evaporation, when water, the surfaces get wet and then they dry, that's all that water is going into evaporation. And transpiration is the use of water by plants. So those are all parts of the hydrologic cycle. So the idea is that what we want is for our low impact development or low impact design measures to replicate those things as closely as possible so that we have less of an effect for when we develop a site. So one of the real issues here that we're talking about is that, well, how does, we saw the definition and it's supposed to be like a forest, so is LID or low impact design measure, it's like a forest. So what's a low impact design measure? A low impact design measure or an effect or a BMP, a best management practice, is something that we put into a development site so that the impacts to the water or to the runoff are minimized. So the idea is you may see stormwater ponds around a development. Those are all measures to limit the effect of the changes we make to the landscape from our development. So the question is there are very specific, or the comment is there are very specific low impact design measures that we take, and those are intended to act hydrologically like a forest. So the big question here in this study and then around this best available science is, can we think of low impact design measures to minimize or mitigate the effect of development as being equivalent to the hydrologic performance of a forest? And we believe that it was intended when it was put into the permit that they are reasonably equivalent. So I'm going to torture you with this for a little bit. And I'm not going to really try to explain what everything here means, but what this is basically the list of the types of best available science that have been applied to this question. And the question is, if you look at a watershed, and what a watershed is the area that drains to a stream. So if I think about the watershed, I think I'm standing in the stream at one point. Where did all the water come from? The land from which all the water came is called the watershed. So if I'm looking at it from a watershed perspective, I go into a watershed and I develop it, or I develop parts of it, or I change it, or I log it, or I put in a farm. Those are all things that can change the hydrologic response, or the way the water runs off to the stream. So that's what we're looking at. So there have been a lot of studies that have been done to try to evaluate from the perspective of the stream, like how does the stream feel about all this runoff that's coming to it? From the perspective of the stream, there's been a bunch of studies done to evaluate what kind of development has what level of impact on a stream. So these are just different ways of looking at how those impacts are evaluated. So real quickly, the first one, what we call 1065, not important what that means right now, but 1065 guideline is something that King County did, and they went and did a study, and they said, here's a good stream, here's a bad stream. How developed is a good stream watershed? How developed is a bad stream watershed? And so what they found is that there's a breakdown at 1065 that says if it's lower than that, it's a good stream. If it's more than that, it's a bad stream. So they started saying, well, that might be a good guideline to use for development standards. For an undeveloped watershed, how much should it develop? So the 10 is impervious surface. It's 10%. So they looked at a watershed, said 10% impervious and 65 is the forest. So they said if a watershed has less than 10% impervious and 65 or more % forest, it's considered a pretty healthy watershed. Not important to do the rest, look at the rest of them, but I want to emphasize the bottom one, and that is that we can do all this analysis of watersheds and how watersheds work and so on, but when you really think about it, you know, people don't develop a watershed, people develop a property. So what does somebody in a property do if they're developing their property? And what are they supposed to do about this? So what we do about this, what all the municipalities do, and what the state's permit, what's called the NPDES permit, requires the city to do, is to adopt a stormwater management manual to control stormwater runoff so that streams remain healthy. So the standards in which that manual are developed are the ones that say if you apply this standard, then we expect, to your development, we expect the stream to remain healthy. So the manual uses low impact design as its most favored measure in order to protect the stream. So if you have a development, you're applying the manual, you're required to apply LID. When you apply LID, we expect there to be minimal effects to the stream. That's what we call a presumptive best available science. So that's just kind of a way about how do we move from an idea or a science into applying these policies or guidelines or rules to development. So these are a few other things that have been done, and one I want to point out for a minute is building cities in the rain. Now this is an evaluation. That's a title, and it's what's called some research that's being done to decide how do we make stormwater management and hydrology match our growth management expectations. So growth management is saying, you know, infill, redevelop, build, provide density so we can for growth, and stormwater is saying don't have impacts. Are those mutually exclusive, or can they be compatible? Building cities in the rain is some ongoing work and ongoing studies that are evaluating that. The other upcoming best available science is right now the larger communities in the state are doing watershed planning in the permit, in the NPDES permit, in order to evaluate if there are other standards that should be applied. So there's other work still going on beyond what I already showed you. So the first thing that I think is really important that we want to throw out as the idea is something I've already said, and that is that is LID, or low impact design measures, are they equivalent to a forest? Meaning that if I develop like this, I apply those measures, will that act hydrologically like a forest? Because we want to retain forests, as you saw from the 1065 rule. So in this case, we're proposing that LID will be equivalent to forest. One of the things that's important is LID can mean lots of different things. And there are a lot of different low impact design measures that people have applied and applied effectively to sites, development sites. And we also believe that they're not all equivalent or they're all created equally. So what we are starting to do is sort out what are the things that are low impact design measures that we think are equivalent to forest and what are LID measures that are not. It doesn't mean they're bad things, it just means they're not as good. We have some examples of what those words mean, what those things are. But before we get to that, you know, I've been talking about all this impervious surface and about forest cover. So I want to just point out a couple things about this map before I talk about the data in it. So you see the 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those are just constructs from the GIS mapping person so I can keep track of the data. But we can add up different things. So of course we're talking about the Fitzgerald area, which is the dashed line you can kind of see in behind all that stuff. So that's one area. You also see the red line that looks like it has a yellow outline. That's the Coal Creek Basin. You also see that, so you can kind of see if you mix and match different pieces, you can have, you kind of put different pieces together. And it's important, as you'll see in the next chart, that it's not important. So that the idea is that I just want to make sure you can keep track of what we're talking about. Are we talking about the basin, or are we talking about the Fitzgerald area? When I talk about hydrology and stream health, I'm talking about the watershed, the Coal Creek watershed. We're talking about our Fitzgerald sub-area, we're talking about the sub-area, and they're not necessarily the same. Watersheds aren't very good at following political boundaries. So this is a representation that was provided in the GIS system of some mapping that was done, and this represents all the impervious surfaces in the watershed or in the sub-area. And this doesn't make any distinction between effective or not effective, it's just impervious area, so this would be considered total impervious area. There's another analysis that was done for forest cover. And this is, wasn't ground truth, but there were analyses that were done to determine where is there forest cover in the basin. So remember, we keep talking about the 10% impervious with 65% forest. Well, where are we at? How much do we have right now? What's there to work with right now? So this is the data set that was used to determine the forest cover. The next thing we want to look at or need to look at is soils. So the soils do two things for us. One is that these are soils that were mapped by the Soil Conservation Service. So they had their own standards about how finely or closely or narrowly or largely they define soils. But this is how they map the soils within the basin. And why this matters is that generally speaking, we break soils hydrologically into 4 letters. They're in A, B, C, or D. And generally speaking, A's and B's are really well-drained soils. C's and D's. C's are fairly moderate to poor drained soils. D's are poorly drained soils. They tend to be very wet soils. And so what we use for this is we say, well, does LID work? And LID needs to have good soils in order to work effectively. So if you have poor soils, you can't really often can't effectively apply LID. So if you have D soils or really poorly drained soils and you say, well, I can build my development, but I can put in LID to make it a forest, it's really hard to make a forest LID in a D soil. So but A's and B's are very good soils. So what you see up here is that the kind of turquoise color up here are A soils. So those are really good soils and they're considered effective soils, generally speaking. And then we have no B soils on here, but they would be in maroon.
Paul,
and then,
could I just ask, so you mean good soils for drainage?
for drainage.
Right, so A is,
So A is
yeah.
good for drainage, for infiltration. D is poor, on the poor side. So C's are what all the pink areas. So most of the area you see are the C soils. So those are the ones that are kind of on the edge of are they good or bad soils. And then the D's, which are the dark green or the green soil areas up there, those are the wet soils, the D soils. And if you put them together, Ben's wetland map and that soil map would probably match pretty closely. But the thing that's really important to remember is that I said LID generally really works in good soils. But these are mapped fairly grossly. Doesn't mean that you can't go to a site and find a good soil in a C area or even a D area, or find a bad soil in an A area. You have to still do site-specific analysis of how good the soils drain. So how does this all add up? So we look at the Fitzgerald area, and we see that, let's just start with that and see that it's, well, 590 acres. So from that map, the forest cover percentage was 36%. And the impervious area coverage was 20%. And the A or B soils, and of course we figured out already that just A soils is only 46 acres. So less than 10% of the land in the basin is A or B soils. So what does this mean? So let's look at, so you can see where all that is, but so let's look at percent forest cover, and you look at it in any combination of those 1, 2, 3, or 4 basins we have. And you see that 32, 32, 36, 38, they're all about the same. So generally speaking, no matter how you slice this area up in fairly gross planning terms, you're going to be in the 32 to 38, 40% range. So that's what's remaining in forest cover according to the way it was defined by the mapping that was done. Percent impervious, you see the same thing. It's pretty much, however we cut it up, it's about 20% impervious. And this isn't too surprising because even just building roads in a developed area usually ends up at being about 10%. So you're just having roads without any houses, you get to the 10%. So the idea that you have roads and you have some developments and so on, it's not surprising at all that you're in 20%. If you get into Bellevue, where you're not in downtown, you're probably in the 25 to 35% range. You're in downtown, you're in the 40s and to 80 to 90, 100% range. But this makes sense. So, but the point of this is first point of this is that we're already over 10% impervious. So if we're thinking a healthy watershed is 10% or less, we're already over that. But as Penn has pointed out, and as I've seen for myself, the stream is actually in pretty good shape. So it proves, of course, that 10% is not perfect, but it's a good guideline to start with. But even though we're at 20%, it could mean that it's not a 20% effective impervious. It means our effective could be under 10. It could mean lots of things. But the point is, we're already well over 10%. The last thing on the A and B soil columns is that it's showing less than 10% of the land as A soils or B soils, which means it's iffy whether or not LID will work everywhere. So it'll have to be site-by-site analysis to see whether or not LID will work everywhere and will be able to be equivalent to forest. I'm going to skip this because this is a summary of what we said before. So basically, one set of ideas of how this would work is that right now the analysis area already sees 10%. So the idea is to not allow any more effective impervious area. So think about the idea of, remember I said no new effective impervious. So the idea is that you can put impervious area in there, it just can't be effective. Meaning that it has to, any impervious area has to be able to disperse or infiltrate into the ground. It cannot run off and go to the stream. Second is the forest is already less than 40% impervious. So the idea would be is there should be no further net loss of forest. When I say net, it means that forest can be restored if the soils are still there. But really that and that LID can be applied. But the idea is that an intact forest that's already there hydrologically is our preferred choice. In any event, the stormwater standards require that you have low impact development measures or any measures that require you to have hydrology that's equivalent to a forest. So what that means is that whatever development occurs, you have to have forest hydrology. So however you go about doing it, whether it's making impervious area ineffective, retaining forest, replacing forest, or providing stormwater measures, you have to meet that last standard. So you have the ability to do this. And this isn't just Bothell, this standard applies everywhere. This stormwater control standard applies everywhere in Western Washington. So there's a couple more things that we're thinking about or working about. And the first thing is that we're going to have, if you think about it, there'll be low impact design measures everywhere, scattered throughout the landscape. So the first thing is that how does the city, how do the individuals, how do the homeowners manage all these stormwater facilities? It's just like, it's a different thing, but it's just like managing a pipe or managing a pump. It's something that has to be cared for and there has to be stewardship for. Second, with the generally moderate to poor soils, is LID feasible? So can we get the infiltration to work at the sites, at individual sites? The third one is that, is there adequate space? So the idea is that if you have a certain area of impervious, you need a certain area of pervious to do dispersion or LID. Do those match? Do you need, do you have enough land left over to have the impervious you want and to be able to control it? And the last thing is whatever ability there might be to transfer development rights. So the idea is that rather than looking at a site, you look at somewhere in the watershed and you say, I'm going to buy development rights from over here to apply to another part of the watershed. So I promised that I'd show a little bit more about what LID measures were. These are the two LID measures that work, bioretention and dispersion. Dispersion is like that trail I showed you. The water doesn't get to the stream. It runs off into open spaces and infiltrates. Bioretention is a design collection system, and the only way water can leave the bioretention is to infiltrate into the ground or to evaporate. There's no runoff that comes from bioretention to be defined as bioretention. Bioretention is an LID that's equivalent to a forest. These are other LID measures that are not equivalent to a forest. Permeable pavement is becoming very popular. Roof downspout controls, meaning like using wells. That's not necessarily equivalent to LID. Vegetated roofs, rainwater collection, minimum excavation. Those are all measures that are LID measures, but they are we're right now they're not in the category we would consider equivalent to a forest.
So I think we already touched on this part of things, but just to let you know where we're going here, and for the record, everybody can keep these dates hopefully on their calendar, and they'll be available, I think, through a number of different pieces of literature and communication. So we'll continue with the program, and Nadine will be doing, and Kirsten will be doing some more polling here after this part of it. So we'll get back into that, and we'll be using that information tonight. We talked about our draft tech memo being completed by the 20th. So that will be available from the city. And then these further discussion meetings are allude to our next two public involvement meetings here on the 26th and then June 9th. And then from those, we'll be, the results of those, from there on out, we'll be working on pulling together the package that will be for council consideration. So hopefully that gives everybody a good idea of where we've been and where we're heading. So.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Darren. Thanks, Parametrics team. So that was a lot of information. Do you, before we get, so with our main question for you after this and before we adjourn is you can peek ahead to it on your comment form, which is, are you comfortable with the tools being considered basically, or are there any that we've missed? So before we go to that, do you have any questions for members of the Parametrics consulting team on what they've done, what they're studying, the range of tools? And it's okay if you don't, we can go straight into the polling. Everything is, you're understanding a little bit of the range of the landscape. Please, sir.
It sounds like the definition of forest is a legal definition, but it's not really an ecological function definition. So for species like marbled merlets, rain garden is not equivalent to a native forest.
So, so the folks who are recording the evening's meeting has asked me to try and summarize or report back the question, so we'll see how close I get. But I think that your question was, sounds like this definition of a forest, which is pretty critical, obviously, for our interest here, is a legal definition rather than a functional definition. Would you say that's accurate, Paul? And you might want to come back to the microphone so we can capture your responses for those who are listening or listening to the YouTube video after tonight.
So what's important is that it's equivalent from the hydrologic functions. So we're only talking about, there may be other types of functions that are important, but we're only speaking in terms of hydrology.
So as opposed to the murrelets and the, any,
We're not talking about wildlife.
bird
we're
species,
talking about,
upland species, yeah.
Other benefits and functions.
Right. Great. Anyone else? Any other questions or observations? Anything to add if you think we may have missed a tool? It is a gorgeous night. We do not need to keep you here till 7:30. As I say, our next session will be a little bit more of a hands-on workshop. We're looking to develop some landscape types and some site-specific types to look at, okay, well, how would this work on a particular piece of landscape at our next meeting. Any other questions or observations? Please, sir.
Yeah, could you clarify that 10% measure you talked about with regard to roads? You said something about when an area has roads, that already consumes a certain amount of the impervious allowance.
Right.
And I didn't quite follow how that adds up into your total numbers.
Paul, if you could kind of repeat the question in your
Yes.
answer. Thank you.
Okay. So the question is that just clarify the 10% around roads and how we get to 10% or what that really means. So it's, what I was talking about is that what we find is that if you separate the percentage of impervious that's in roadways from the impervious that's parts of driveways and houses and sidewalks, we find that in general in kind of suburban type settings that the roads themselves make up about 10% of the land of the watershed, just the roads. So then other impervious surfaces come from other, from houses and others. It's just kind of a rule of thumb more than a reality, but it's an important one just in understanding that you get to the 10% just by building the roads to get to the houses. So that, so if you think about it in terms of if 10% is a guideline that you're trying to achieve and it's effective impervious area, and we drain the roads to the streams and so on, that if that 10% is all made up in roads, then everything else has to be ineffective impervious. So that's just kind of one way to look at it. Is that
So how would you put a roof on a house?
Well,
Can you repeat the question? Sorry,
yeah,
Paul.
so the question is how do you put a roof on a house? So the next part of this is that either you do stormwater management on the roadway, meaning that you control it to a level as if it's not there. You make it ineffective. So rooftop you make ineffective. So all the water that comes off the roof, you put into a rain garden and it infiltrates. And then it becomes zero effective impervious. So you can still put the roof in, but you make it ineffective.
Are you able to do that with the road as well?
So you can do it with the roads. Their LID is applied to the roads. It's more difficult. And the reason it's more difficult is because roads are linear and they kind of bounce along and they cut through the landscape. So it's really hard to do that. Whereas a house is generally in one spot and you can put basically one rain garden where the roof is and so on. It's just more difficult, more complicated, but there are measures to do that. So you can do the same thing with a road. It's just more difficult. And then roads cross many different soil types and many different conditions. So you might have one section that LID works in and the next section that it doesn't.
A lot of municipalities do just that with their road design. It's pretty standard now where the soils are, favorable for that. There'll be, LID features along that road, and then sometimes.
Darren, you'll have to come to the mic for it to be recorded. Yeah, thank you.
Sometimes it'll be where if they can get enough, where these soils vary, sometimes they can get the treatment through and then use a piping system to move different ways. But I mean, that's not the same exactly as infiltrating straight down. But a lot of municipalities now use these measures along roadways. So it's fairly well accepted. Yeah.
There's two gentlemen, so first in the back, please, and then up front here. That's you, sir. Thank you.
So on the question on, when you go to the LA and you say the non-light forest cover item, when you're saying lighting and that type of thing, are you guys factoring in is there any factor in about obviously pipes clog, I have a drain system, I drain to the pipe, the effective means of removing water and keeping it into the effective impervious area can be affected by the man-made items,
so the question is whether or not there's, how does maintenance or lack of maintenance factored into the effectiveness of low-impact design? Is that your question? So there's really kind of two ways that works. One is that operation and maintenance manuals are required to be developed with the stormwater systems. So the low-impact design elements become part of the stormwater system. So the maintenance is part of it, and part of maintenance is inspections. So, but I did raise that as one of the questions. Is the I guess I can't back up.
Should be able to, yeah.
That one.
The other back. There you go.
And that's that first bullet, and that's the long-term viability of development. And one of the things is maintenance responsibility. So the key is that we can't just throw them out there without the ability to have the maintenance or have the responsibility of maintenance fully assigned to somebody and have an ability to fund it and make sure that it happens. So it is an element. So we don't really look at degradation, we look at maintenance and repair.
Good question. And sir, please, thanks for waiting.
Just kind of looking at your mapping of the soils conditions, and you have a 74 quality soil condition in the Fitzgerald subarea. Would we assume then that it would take more land to meet LID standards as opposed to a
Yeah.
higher density?
Right.
The requirements going to reduce things.
So the question is, does the quality of the soil translate into requiring more land in order to do or apply LID? And the short answer is generally yes. And that is mainly because you have, usually the poor quality of the soil is not so much the soil as much as the depth of the water table. So often the area becomes larger. So there's another comment I made. I said lots of things, but there's another thing I made that said, which is really kind of that last, that's the third bullet there. Is there adequate space for LID to match development density? And so that goes up and down with the ability, in part with the soil, but not completely.
You also made a strong point, Paul, it seemed to me, about there needing to be a site-by-site consideration of what's appropriate. So it seems to me it's not really a one-size-fits-all anywhere in the sub-area, really.
That's correct.
Yeah, thanks. Please.
So as you're working on the hierarchy of say the property owner's goals would be to have as much they can develop for maximum value of their land, assuming that's their intent. And if you have poor soils quality, other municipalities have looked at LID with the aspect of you start with this goal at the top, and you work your way down to what you actually can do within that zone to accomplish the best stormwater management practice possible. Is this in Bothell, is this going to be, if you get to this point, this level, you just don't develop?
Could you repeat that question, Paul, or summarize the question, please?
So I guess if I can paraphrase, do you keep applying or seeing whether or not LID is feasible, and can you arrive at a point where it's not feasible in any circumstances and therefore the land's not developable? I'll go down this path. So there's an important distinction that's made in stormwater management. It's what we call is the difference between presumption and demonstration. And stormwater management works by saying, if I do a certain thing, I expect it to perform in a certain way. And that's all I have to do, is do this thing that I have to do, and then it's presumed, the presumption, that I'm going to be in compliance. Then the other end of it is if you go down that list and say, I've applied, I tried this, they don't work. At the end of it, I still have the ability to make a demonstrative, demonstrate that it'll work. So there are flow control standards that can be applied no matter what the site is, and those would have to be applied. So if you go through LID and you can't apply that, the standard is the equivalent of how LID is supposed to be working. So you can presumptively do LID, or you can put in a stormwater management facility that'll have what's expected to be the same performance. It's a very strict standard. It will still be difficult to do. It'll still have effects on the amount of development, but it is a standard that it's available to you to apply. It's what's called the 8% standard. So it's basically just the simplest way to put it is that it's the same volume of water that's running off from your site now is the same volume you're allowed to discharge.
So somehow you have to capture on your property all the rest.
And
let
the
it
only
infiltrate,
way you can
yeah.
get rid of water is that anything that's under the 8% or through evaporation or infiltration.
Have you seen, Paul, can you give us an example of perhaps where you've seen that on the landscape anywhere in Western Washington, someone using that control system?
Well, LID has been applied quite broadly at this point. The performance measure is in the brand-new ecology manual. So off the top of my head, I can't think of where that's been, where the 8% standard's been applied. I do know of sites that have applied, had very intense development on very good infiltrating soils that had a lot of difficulty with meeting a less stringent standard.
So they didn't get down to the 8%, in other words?
No, the standard wasn't as strict.
Yeah, okay,
So,
thank you.
but this has been, so presumably, if LID applies and you're doing that standard, you can, I mean, it's physically possible to do the 8% standard.
Right.
It's just challenging.
And we might want to play around with that a little bit at our next meeting, so folks, we can unpack a little bit physically. And we'll take some brainstorming among the team, how we set that up for participants. But it just to help us all envision what the range of tools are and what could be, a last response strategy. Thanks. Any other questions or observations? Please, sir, in the back.
There's one slide where they show forestation, I think it's around the
Sorry, sir?
There was one slide about showed forest at 36%.
Oh, yeah, the table with the forest at 36%, yeah.
Is that ever used as an effective value when putting in requirements for LID or maybe a particular site within LID? Would they be required to provide more forestation or would what they have there now just be accepted?
So in other words, would you be capped at what you have today?
Well, usually they say, 30, 40, 50%,
Right.
whatever required
Yeah.
forestation in LID, but when you have the existing covenants, can you default to that, or do you have to stay with the?
Grow it, yeah. Paul, do you have a response on that one?
I only picked up pieces of the question.
Right, so I think it was, if you're less than the 36% now, would you have to grow to that to reach your effective forest cover? Is that what you're getting?
Part of it, and
Yeah.
that, if it's a general rule, it shall be 40%.
Yeah,
Could you defer back to the existing 36, or would you have to go to 40%?
right.
So I think the most straightforward way to answer that is to say that there's not an expectation that you go build up to 65% forest. The expectation would be, and the way it would work is that in that gap, so you have two choices with the forest. You leave it, which has a certain performance to it, or you apply LID and you have a less certain performance to it, meaning it's expected to be equivalent, but it wouldn't work as well. So then when you're in that gap of between say 40% and 65%, then we're assuming that you wouldn't be an expectation that you'd be doing forest, but you would have to have the hydrology from the development be equivalent to a forest. So you don't have to have a forest, you just have to have something that acts hydrologically like a forest. And that's where the LID would be.
I look forward to applying this on the landscape at our next meeting so we can see, how would this work? And I think we're going to have to clone you 3 or 4 times, Paul, to be with us at each table at our next meeting, so we'll have to figure that out. But we will have a resource person. The aim is to have a resource person at each table as we go through kind of this challenge of how this would work on the land. Maybe a final question or concern? Did I miss someone in the last round? Was there another hand? Anyone else? Sure.
One of my concerns about lowering forest covers and going below it, you have some properties that are 65, 70%, and if you lower that forest cover, you have select deforestation where people will, look at it property more desirable. There's, I mean, the issue is when there's money involved with the development, and money involved in the developing of that, there tends to be a little bit more kind of willingness to figure out a way to make that work. And I've experienced that just in my own. And that's what, you know, one of my concerns is that we don't want to set anything below a standard to be able to say, hey, look, you can cut down up to 38% of your trees or 26% of your trees, and say, hey, it was like that when we started this development process. And that's, I think there might be some gap issue there.
So it's more a comment about what exists today and then what we might be requiring, and being cautious about what we're incentivizing by perhaps a lower standard.
Exactly.
Right, thank you. Ma'am.
Well, along the lines of what this gentleman just said, I want to know how the city it has not already been enforcing the standards that are in place. So why do you think that anything that we would come up with here would be enforced? There's a construction project on 39th Avenue right now. It's going to have mega houses in construction. They're leaving the old house, and there's hardly any on the whole acreage. There's hardly any impervious surface. I don't understand. If you're not holding the city to enforce the laws that are already on the books, why do you think we would have faith in anything that was decided here?
And ma'am, I would just suggest that perhaps that, I would have to think that that development is actually in the county right now, because it doesn't sound like it could be in this,
It's right
in the city of Bothell, okay.
Yes, it is.
So yep,
I do have
please, yeah, so
response to that.
yep, and Paul, if you'd like to summarize first, then, yeah.
So the comment is that is basically how does the city enforce things like forest retention and soil retention and so on. So it's a question being addressed by all the communities here in the area, trying to figure out what to do with how to enforce LID and all the other stormwater standards and so on. So we've been doing stormwater management on sites for a long time, and normally what happens is that like a stormwater pond gets put into an easement or it gets in a tract, and so that it's captured like that. So the question is that, and what communities are starting to do is that because the forest is part of the stormwater management system, the forest gets a tract or a conservation easement in the same way as if a pond does. So then those trees are because they're part of the stormwater system, they no longer belong solely to the person that owns the property. They are part of stormwater management. So the enforcement becomes less of it's on somebody's property, I have to see them cut down a tree and enforce it. It's more of it belongs to the subdivision, it belongs to the stormwater management. So it becomes enforceable through the fact that the person doesn't own the right to that tree anymore, because the tree is part of the stormwater system.
And I would offer that this really is something
That's
we
just
need
one
to
approach.
explore. Yeah,
That's exactly how it would.
appreciate that, and I would say let's keep that on the table as a part of the packages that we develop here. So you've raised not just a technical technique question, but an ongoing enforcement and monitoring question. So just keep that on the table. Appreciate it. And along with that, trust, you were raising that. Thank you. All right, if there are no, Nadine, I think you have a final question for us. So, yeah. She has two questions. So back to the clickers, and we'll hear from Tom and adjourn. Thank you. Thanks, Paul.
To my presentation, and we'll, all right, let's see. Okay. So as we've talked about the low impact development tools that the parametrics team has proffered forth. Oh yeah. So I'll read through these. Yeah. So we've talked about bioretention or rain gardens, dispersion. So those first two being like a forest, performing like a forest. Also permeable pavements, roof downspout controls, soil quality and depth, vegetated roofs, minimum excavation foundations, and water reuse. So after hearing from parametrics on these approaches, A, I am comfortable with the tools being considered. B, they are headed in the right direction. C, some important strategies are missing. D, not sure or other.
Can I just ask a question on that?
Yeah.
Because what I heard in the presentation, the majority of those on there weren't really good LID techniques. So,
So Paul, you might want to come back to the microphone. So this is, consulting team,
can we go back
Right.
to the previous slide?
Sure.
yeah. So the first two have a certain, yeah.
Are the two good ones and the rest of them?
So what I mean is that they're all perfectly good low-impact development techniques. There's only bioretention, rain gardens, and dispersion that are true full equivalents, considered equivalent to forests by themselves. So any of the others also provide measures that will reduce impacts to lessen the need for other stormwater controls, but they're not 100%, they're not that equivalents that bioretention or dispersion are. So they're good but not great. And
Nadine's question is if you can add several together of the remaining 6 or so on the
yeah,
list.
I think it's fair to say that, that's why it's really important to understand the concept of total impervious area and effective impervious area. Because any measure you can apply to make impervious surface ineffective is a useful measure, and it reduces the amount of control you need and the amount or the potential impact.
So you're saying the first two are almost like a 1-to-1 ratio versus the ones below it like a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1?
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. So yes, it's a good way to think about them as being one, like that the first two are would be considered reasonably equivalent, and all the others have some lesser degree, or like a ratio.
But could together be combined.
Those are not your opinion, those are low-impact development standards.
The whole list are low-impact development standards. The bioretention and the dispersion are leaning toward opinions. Other people might have other opinions that others are just as good. If a,
Those aren't opinions, though, those are standards
In the Department of Ecology, you mentioned the manual.
that are in the low-impact development? Or is that parametrics opinion?
So one of the concepts of low impact, so the question is that are these opinions or are they standards? Is that a fair summary of your question?
Well, is it regulations? I mean, that soil quality and depth.
Right.
Okay, is not as good as a bioretention.
Right.
Is the percentage that you need a standard, or is it an opinion that can change?
I think the fairest response to that is that any stormwater measure, including LID, involves an engineering judgment. So I would consider it an element of engineering judgment. There are guidelines that describe what kind of expectations there are, so that you have to apply these in a certain way. So that's a rule in a stormwater manual, and that if applied that certain way, they would be expected to perform in this way, and then this is how much credit you would get for it. So it's in a stormwater manual, which is an enforceable manual. But the presumption that I'm describing around bioretention and dispersion is part of our opinion about saying this is equivalent. They don't say this is equivalent to it. They just say these are measures that apply. And the whole concept of low impact design is to apply effective measures. And that's like starts out in the preambles of this is what you do, and apply any and all measures that are going to improve, minimize the impacts and improve the performance. That's why I'm kind of dancing around the idea of whether or not it's a standard or a measure and so on. You're supposed to apply as many and as much and effectively all of these things as possible, but ultimately they have to perform to a level that's required in the manual.
So we will stay with that at our next meeting, but I'm going to ask Nadine to take over and let folks vote on this, because we're approaching 7:30. I just want to be
Yes,
respectful
we're
of time.
gonna-
This is exactly the meat and the subject matter of our discussion in 2 weeks. So we'll be staying right with those questions. This is exactly what we're getting to.
All right, so since people had started voting, I had to reset that slide. So the polling is now open on this question. So after hearing from parametrics on the approaches to low-impact development, A, I am comfortable with the tools being considered. B, they are headed in the right direction. C, some important strategies are missing. Or D, other or not sure. All right, let's move forward.
So just, go ahead, Nadine. Yeah.
All right, so 19% are comfortable, 16% headed in the right direction, 39% some important strategies are missing, so that's another thing we'll talk about at the next meeting.
Actually, I do want to talk about that here, but
Now,
yeah.
okay.
Yep.
And then D, not sure.
And that is fine, that's all process the inquiry, but are there some that are missing that we should be researching and be prepared to bring back to you? Does anyone like to share what you think is missing? Sure.
Reforestation.
Reforestation, okay, great. Any others that you think are missing? So we can make sure to consider them, putting them back in the toolbox. Anyone else willing to, the missing? All right, if you, please.
How they're enforced, that kind of bothered me when somebody said,
Mm-hmm,
there's no way to enforce these.
mm-hmm,
Yet for new development in the city of Bothell, for certain areas, it seems like they are being enforced.
from your perspective, sure.
So that'd be kind of nice to have a set in there. Is this the LID that all of new construction in Bothell's being held to currently?
No, so this conversation we're having now is just for the Fitzgerald sub-area, and we can get back to you on how this might apply citywide at our next meeting. The critical area ordinance still applies broadly, but this, what we're in this discussion, these 3 discussions about would be specific to Fitzgerald. Would be up to council whether or not they'd want to extrapolate and make that applicable citywide. So you have one more question for us,
One
Nadine.
last question.
Yeah.
So the next meeting is in 2 weeks. It's on Thursday, May 26th, same place, same time. Will you be able to attend? A, yes, I will be able to attend, or my designee. B, no, I won't be able to make it. Or C, not sure.
And Tom, go ahead and come on up, because I know we'll need you for close.
All right.
I'm glad to hear most, thanks Nadine, most, oh, go ahead and leave that up. Sorry about that.
we go.
So most folks being able to attend. If you're not able to attend, let's hear from you. Please be in touch with Bruce so you can make sure to follow along in some way or another. And jury's out for at least one of us. I don't blame you. But thank you for being here, and thank you particularly for the parents and children who are with us tonight. And hopefully we get home before normal bedtime. And we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. Tom, please.
Thank you very much for participation tonight. It's important to the city, and wanted to make sure everybody had an opportunity to sign up outside and give us their email, because we will be following up with some email reminders of the next meeting, as well as when we get things put up on the city's community development website. It won't be on the main page for the Bothell website, but if you go to community development, you'll be able to get to the Fitzgerald study area items that we put up there. Give us till next week. We won't have anything up tomorrow, but give us till next week when we'll have that rolling. And please be mindful of the 20th, when the first technical memorandum, I know we're repeating ourselves, but when the first technical memorandum comes up. And if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with Bruce. Thank you for attending. Let's give our consultants a round of applause.
And all you all, thank you. Thanks for being here.
And grab a cookie on your way out.
And leave a comment for him if you have it. Thank you. Yeah.
They're longer, is that right?
Yeah.